Right, good evening everybody. It's now 7 o'clock and we'd like to start the meeting of the Health and Wellbeing Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'd like to remind everybody present that this meeting will be recorded for publication on the Council's website and will normally be available within 3 working days of the meeting. I would also like to remind members and officers to use their microphone when speaking. And I'd just like to say before we start, thank you for coming everybody and welcome this first HOSC of the new year. Apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies for absence, Jenny?
Thank you, Chair. An apology received from Ian Evans and welcome Neil Woodbridge as his substitute.
Okay, thank you, Neil. Minutes. I move that the minutes of the Health and Wellbeing Overview and Scrutiny Committee held on the 16th of November 2017 be approved as a correct record. Are there any comments as to the accuracy of the minutes? No, that's great. We'll take it as agreed then. Thank you very much. Let me sign those. Thank you. Thank you. Urgent items of business. I have not agreed to any urgent items of business this evening. Declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? No? Excellent. Thank you very much. We're moving on swiftly to items raised by Health Watch. Are you well enough to raise any items, Kim?
Thank you, Chair. I shall give it a go. I shall probably be coughing through it, so please excuse me. I have an item that I've been asked to bring by the advisory group and the board and various organisations in Thurrock. I'm aware that virtually the whole of this evening is around the STP. And the reason that I'm raising this now and not then is because I don't want it to detract from the actual work that needs to be done this evening and that. The concerns that have been raised with us are that they feel that the consultation document fails the people of Thurrock. It's very, very hard for people to access it, as there is, up until Monday, which is 6 weeks in, the only option you had was to go online to do it, attend an event, which we've got them booked, and I know they're coming up, but we need to be aware, but online only. We have requested since day one for some hard copies because we do a lot of face-to-face work and there are a lot of people that have not got access to computers, we know that. We've also got people in the hubs, the volunteers in the hubs are offering to help people to do it online, so we've tried that way as well. When you go out with this document, people do not realise that in here is anything to do with Orsett Hospital. They say, oh, I'm not really interested in that, and we say, but this is about Orsett Hospital as well. You have to go 48 pages into the 54-page document to find the Orsett part of it. We asked for hard copies. We got some. They came on Monday. Only 2,000 were printed for the whole STP area. So for 1.4 million people, there's 2,000 hard copies that we can sit with people to go through, and we got 97 of them in Thurrock. So there are some real concerns. We've asked about and been asking since the beginning for an accessible, easy read document for those people in the community that we could help with that, older people, people with learning disabilities. There isn't one. We were told that there isn't any money to produce one, and legally they don't have to, and I think Neil will pick that bit up as well, because the coalition are very upset by the fact that it's been very inaccessible to a whole group of people in Thurrock. We understand. Also, there is an appendix which is in your papers this evening, but this is not available as a hard copy anywhere, and there is no intention of producing this as a hard copy up until today, which tells you exactly what's going to happen with Orsett and locally, which is the bit that people need, and they have no access to this unless they go online. So the one document that would help them to understand what's going to happen in Thurrock and to complete this is not available. So we have real concerns, and as I said, it's been raised by other groups, that it is not accessible to everybody in Thurrock. It's not a fair consultation. Also, on the front of this document, it gives you the option to order it in other languages. It actually gives you the option in that language. So anybody reading that and, say, phoning up who speaks Urdu and ask for it, the number it gives you is one line to one man, Paul Eilert, who's part of the consultation team. We've left messages on there to ask for it in other options. Nobody's got back to us. We had a member of the public who is Welsh, who for us phoned up and left a message in Welsh asking for it, and nobody's ever called him back. So it's not even a team or an organisation. We've been here before with concerns around consultation documents and people having a fair say and a fair access to it. Now, I've spoken to Mandy, I've spoken to Tom today. Things are being moved to rectify some of this, but we're 7 weeks into 12 weeks. We're not going to get round to everybody that needs to have a say. So I just wanted that raised and minuted that we do have concerns that there's not fair access to this document.
Thank you, Kim. Yeah, I can see that Andy wants to come in there. We'll let you come in, Andy.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair, and thanks, Kim, for the feedback. Obviously, it's concerning to hear those perceptions. I think that, and as you know, there's a number of conversations since meetings this week to where we can improve. I do just want to correct a few points, though. Before the consultation started on the 30th of November, we shared and discussed, and indeed, Kim, I believe, met with Healthwatch locally to agree the approach, and the approach has been discussed at scrutiny committees, all three scrutiny committees. Now, I'm not at all pretending it's perfect, and of course, we can improve. We did launch pretty widely on the 30th, making it really clear how people can access the documents, both online, both by calling us or emailing us and making them available. If we need additional over the 2,000, we don't yet, but we will, of course, print more documents if that's what's required. We are finding, though, increasingly people are wanting to download the document. We've had a huge number of downloads rather than printed copies. And on the period, it's just important to correct one point, I think, Kim. It's not a 12-week period. We're in a 14-week period, which is, I think, the longest that's been done locally, partly because it's a big patch and we've got a lot of people who are keen to involve. And I also just wanted to, if I may, just correct you on the accessible, easy read version. If you have been told we're not doing it, that's not correct. We have been advised by the county council's in-house team that it will be very difficult to do because of the length and relative complexity of the document. But notwithstanding, we have done that, and we do have that available. And in addition to that, we have made contact with a number of groups where we might be able to hold focus groups as an addition to people obviously kind of passively receiving documents, where we can have interactions, including working through, I believe, the diversity network locally. So we do still have a reasonable chunk of time of the consultation to build on the initial conversations that we've had.
Yeah, Kim.
Thank you. The Diversity Network were contacted this afternoon to ask if they could run that event after we've raised our concerns. We have worked with, and we have been running events and going out and speaking to groups and asking them to respond as a group. We were clearly told, and I believe, I know here for that you also, that there was no, clearly told there was not a easy read version.
Just correcting that, Kim, that's what you've been told incorrectly.
Yeah. So, and we do know, we were under the impression that the Orsett part, which we all worked on, would be part of and would be a pull-out section within it, or would be somehow with it. It's just, it's not in there. It's an appendix that gives you the clear understanding of it, which is what our concern is.
Okay, I think I'll go to Mandy and then Councillor Redsell.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, I've had a long conversation with Kim today. We in the CCG are going to print the Thurrock pull-out, if you like, for Orsett, and get those copies over to Kim. Can I draw everybody's attention to our own magazine, which is the CCG's Insight, and that sets out nicely the sort of signposting of Orsett as well. Yes, they're everywhere. They are. We have. They're everywhere. We are also getting hundreds more questionnaires, hard copy questionnaires. Louise has ordered those tonight, and those will be winging their way, and also more copies of the documents. So the conversations we've had today, Kim, we've actioned all of that. But I do, please read our magazine as well, because it fits well with it.
Joy?
Thanks, Chair. I mean, we as councillors, we are getting out there to people. They are ringing us, and we are explaining to them all about Orsett Hospital, when and if and what, And I think Kim knows how I feel. There are many, many older people out there who, one day, us as a council may realise that there's lots of people who don't use internet, haven't got a computer, and we've got, I would say thousands, Kim, yes, of people sitting out there who we go to visit, and they haven't got a clue of how to use any of that, don't want to use it. So we've got to, I don't know when we will, but we might get there sometime. Even when we do consultations, we've got to realise that there's a group of people out there that we are just brushing over, that they don't matter. Because I tell you what, that's how they feel out there. When there's any consultation going on, they're not in the forefront of anything. We are, because we're all internet users, we're all, because we have to use that. We've got no choice in the jobs we all do. But people out there aren't the same way as us. They are just left behind in a way. They've got views, but they are left behind. And I think even the council have got to be the first to take on board that there's those people out there and not just brush it off, because I think that's what we're doing. We're doing things by the internet. Oh, it's on the web. I think we've got to take that on board for the people of Thurrock.
Yeah, I'd just kind of like to echo what Councillor Wressel's just said. I mean, it is right that a lot of people can access the web, but they're, particularly in fact, whether Thurrock was a specialist, I don't know, but for every single consultation we've done since I've been elected, it certainly is the case that Thurrock does seem to have a large proportion of people that, for all sorts of reasons, don't have access to the web or can't use the web. And, we do need to make that extra effort to make sure that other means of communication are available to them. I think from what I've heard, that it seems that some of your problems might be remedied. Kim, are you happy with what you've heard tonight so far? Yeah.
Come in.
And of course, and I'll pass over to Councillor Holloway.
Sorry to interrupt. I think it is really important. Just to add, actually, I'm really appalled by what's been flagged. I really, really am. I actually can't believe that halfway through a consultation, there's no easy read version of this consultation. Do you have a copy? But excuse me, but I thought you said actually due to the complexity, it was very difficult to put it into an easy read version, and that shouldn't be done on request. That should be done in line with these being produced. And this is something I raised every single time this came up, because people with a learning disability and a learning difficulty should be having the opportunity to engage. It's from day one. They have significant health issues and will be using these facilities. And actually, if it wasn't down to the good work of Health Watch and Thurrock Lifestyle Solutions, who are actively going out to groups and trying to get them involved, they wouldn't have a clue. So I think to completely disregard people who have a learning disability and other disabilities is really shocking. And again, I would echo what Kim said about, again, every single meeting we have had on this as councillors, we have said, will it be very clearly stated that this is a separate consultation? Will it be buried as part of an STP consultation? And we were assured every time we asked that no, it wouldn't. So I'm sure every councillor is very upset to see that the things that we were assured would happen have not happened.
So, Chair, if I may clarify, so on the easy read point, I think I stated it clearly before, but just to check, we worked with the group in Essex County Council and took advice. Now, their view was it would be very difficult to translate the document into, but we have done it and we do have it available. We've done it in any case, and I can get that circulated around this committee. And it's absolutely not the case that we're disregarding any groups at all. We have, as you've seen through the plans, we have a large number of public events. We have about 40 then separate focus groups across the patch, and we're continuing to build those. That's part of the point of having a 14-week period, is that we learn as we go along. So we're not quite halfway through yet. We are still adding new meetings. In fact, Kim referred to some of those, and we're keen to, and genuinely, we welcome the input so that we get the opportunity, where we haven't done it perfectly, to put it right. But I can't accept your language about completely disregarding. That is not the case. It's not the case on any part of the STP. The second thing I do want to clarify is around the place of Orsett, which no doubt we'll come to speak of. It is a part of the consultation document. Drafts of the document were shared, including with Healthwatch, before we finalised them, and lots of comments came forward, which we addressed. The first summary in the document of the whole is the two sheets that I'm holding up here. That's the summary. That's the first part you come to on the actual service proposals. There are 5 of those there, as you see. Number 5 here, it's really clear about this is Orsett and part of the documentation. So myself, I would have a different view when you use the word buried, councillor. I don't think that constitutes being buried.
Okay, Neil.
Just to come in on the issue of people with learning disabilities, for me it was quite sad, because what's happened is it feels like you've shot yourselves in the foot, because we know there are enormous sensitivities around people with learning disabilities. All the councillors here, every meeting I've attended to, either as the public or here, were saying you're going to have an accessible version. Yes, yes, yes. The response when people were telephoned today, or whenever it was, by the coalition was, it's not, Essex have told us it's not a legal requirement. That upset people, because our understanding of the equality duty is it's a reasonable adjustment, which is all that we were asking for, was a reasonable adjustment. And now, sadly, when we get into the detail, there's some good ideas in here, and it's not, some of the things are excellent, but probably people now will feel as though there's a conspiracy, even though there isn't any, or they'll worry that you're trying to hide things even though you aren't. So Kim and myself and others are going to have to work very hard with our groups to assure them this is okay. And my final point is, Thurrock Council, we've done some really difficult consultations about closing buildings, etc., etc. They managed to produce Easy Read every time for us when we ask, and the government produces legislation in Easy Read. So really it's about finding the right people that can do it, because it is possible. Even your summary page at the beginning as Easy Read would help us enormously.
Yep. Thank you, Neil. And I think, in summary to this, clearly, as is often the case with very large consultations, the communications initially maybe not the best, shall we say. And I think this is possibly what's happened here, is that it seems to me clearly there has been information available, but that information that it is available has not been passed through the correct channels to the correct people. From what I'm hearing tonight, it seems that a lot of that might be remedied from now on in. Can I take it as given that this document will be circulated more widely to people, so more people can get access to this document, and also that the Easy Read document will be made available at the earliest available opportunity to Healthwatch for the further consultations? Excellent, thank you. With that, we'll move on.
Sorry. I've not seen this before, by the way, till tonight. And I've just noticed that next week there is a meeting in the Civic Hall, which is in my ward, and none of my residents, I can assure you, know about these 2 meetings in the Civic Hall. One on the 6th of March and one next week on the 24th. So if that's how, my residents would have come back to me knowing there was a meeting on whatever, so I know. It's the first time I've seen it tonight. So.
Okay. Thank you for pointing that out. But as I say, I think communication has been an issue, but hopefully we'll address that moving forward. Okay, so we're now on to item 6 on the agenda, which is on pages 17 to 38. Reports on Mid and South End South East Essex Sustainability and Transformation Plan consultation proposals. Can I ask Andrew, NHS England, to introduce the report, please?
Yeah, of course. So we've been touching on process, and there are a few slides I've got here which I'll speak to, obviously go into then the content that we're consulting on. And some of what we've been discussing around some of the relative complexity of some of the proposals, I think, will come up. And Tom might wish to add colour in a few places. So just on process overall, we've probably really rehearsed this, but we're in the middle now of the 14-week consultation period. So we start on the 30th of November, runs right through to the 9th of March. We've rehearsed some of the different ways that engagement and consultation is underway, both through the documents. This is out of date now on the focus groups already. We've got many more than 20 focus groups, and we're adding meetings the whole time, including with district councils and a number of voluntary sector partners. So I just should say, first of all, that we are consulting on a relatively small range of hospital services, but that's in the context of a much wider STP. And as you'll know, we've been developing that locally for the last 18 months, and have been presentations to this committee as well as the Health and Wellbeing Board throughout that as we've developed the process. And we've had a long period of public engagement, and colleagues around the table, including Kim, have been extremely supportive in helping us with that engagement period before consultation. So what we've got on the slide is a quick overview. So we're consulting, if you like, on the top right-hand part of the STP only at the moment, which is changes to hospital, which is what these slides then focus on. But the wider STP includes a range of issues, including self-care, how we integrate teams, and of course, crucially, locally, as we'll come back to, the development of localities and the development here of the 4 hubs and the issues associated with Orsett Hospital. So just an important point that the hospital and Orsett is a focused consultation, but it's a context of the much wider STP. So there are 5 main things, and these are the 5 that I held up from the document a moment ago that are important. So firstly, on hospital care, and you'll know that this has evolved over time, this position, but the hospital care remains local, and that each hospital will continue to have 24-hour A&E, and the vast majority of services, as we'll come to, remain in their existing hospital locations. The second principle, though, is that we're looking where we can to concentrate some more specialist services in one place rather than across 3, where it makes clinical sense to do so, and there's good evidence that to do so would improve quality and outcomes. Thirdly, that with access to specialist services, particularly an area of stroke care, should be, as now, the initial access should be via local A&E, and we'll come back to that. So although there will continue to be some cases where in an emergency people might bypass their local hospital for a specialist centre, as now, the model that we're developing is for people to present at A&E, and then in discussion with clinicians and families, if needed, an onward transfer might happen. The fourth principle, particularly at this time of year, is particularly important, and we're looking where we can to separate the planned elective work from the emergency flow, and that's principally to improve the patient and carer experience. As everybody will be aware, we repeatedly counsel some patients due to the emergency flows when you combine elective and emergency. And the fifth part, which we'll come to and discuss, no doubt, the Orsett proposals, some services that are currently provided in hospital could be provided much closer to home, either in hubs or in some cases at home using new technology. So I'll speed up a little bit, mindful of time. So this is very important, I think, is to put this in context of what's being proposed. So if we look at the emergency side first, across the 3 A&E departments, Southend, Chelmsford and here, on an average day about 960 people will attend. Of those, on a typical day, about 300 patients might be admitted across those 3 hospitals. If we go forward with the proposals outlined in the consultation document, we estimate that about 15 of those people might then be transferred on to a more specialist site. So that context is important, I think. Well over 900, then 300 admissions, and of those about 15 under the proposals potentially going to a different site. On the, if you will, the other side of the coin, on planned or elective treatment, if you stick with the 380 figure, what that refers to is, on average, that's the number of people that would visit the 3 hospitals for a planned operation at present on a typical day. And of those 380 in the future, if we implement the proposals as planned, would be about 14 patients would go to a different site to that which they go now. So clearly, by taking that side, the 15, and the second side, the 14, in total, around about 29 or 30 patients per day are affected by the proposals. So I'm going to focus just quickly on some of the changes as they affect Thurrock and obviously Basildon Hospital as the local hospital. Now, down the left-hand side, you will see of this slide that the vast majority of services stay the same, and I hope that's helpful to reiterate that. So no changes to A&E, maternity, intensive care, etc. There's also no change or no services will be removed from the Essex Cardiothoracic Centre from the CTC that exists already on the Basildon side. What will change, though, under the proposals, and that's what's highlighted in green on here, is at the moment, and will continue to, but we provide services for people who've suffered a stroke on all 3 sites. But the proposal is that at Basildon Hospital, we establish a so-called hyperacute stroke unit, a HASU, which enables more intensive care for the first 48 to 72 hours for patients. Similarly, going down in green, in a few specialty areas like in respiratory and vascular and some heart conditions, there are proposals to establish more specialist teams on the Basildon side. And on the planned side, some changes to orthopaedics, which we'll come back to later on, and the principles that we spoke about earlier on. Now, in the interest of time, I wasn't going to focus particularly on the Broomfield and then the Southend slides. I'm very happy to come back to those in questions if that would be useful. So at a summary level, just to reiterate, all existing outpatients and the vast majority of inpatient treatment remains local. Clearly, I'll come to Orsett again in a moment, and we spoke about that at the early part of this meeting, with the medical centres that are proposed under the Thurrock plans that people here will be very, very familiar with. I've mentioned specialist stroke unit being planned for Basildon, and some of the specialist teams that are planned for Basildon Hospital. And for planned orthopaedic operations, and this is again the planned work, a proposal to move some of that work in the south of and this is inpatient, more specialist end orthopaedic surgery in the south of the Mid and South Essex footprint to the south end, and obviously that has an impact on patients here. And then you've got outlined what some of the plans are there in Chelmsford and more widely building on gynaecology for Southend. So just briefly, and again we've mentioned Orsett, and no doubt we'll come back to that in conversation. A part of what we're seeking views on as part of this consultation is the services that are currently provided on the Orsett site, how we will integrate those across the 4 medical centres, integrated medical centres that are proposed, obviously in Purfleet, at Thurrock Community, in Corringham, and in the new development at Tilbury. And that's a big part and a big focus of the conversations, obviously, in this part of the SGP area. So I just also want to then touch on transport. As I said, we've been working up these proposals, had a number of engagement events over the months before consultation, and probably quite rightly, as soon as we talk about people moving between sites, transport and difficulties potentially around transport come up. So what we've got included in the consultation document, and having a range of conversations about this, is introduction of 2 new aspects of transport which will help us to implement the proposals, but more importantly will help patients and their families if we were to go ahead with these changes. So the first of those is where, and people in Tom's team are working hard at this, where somebody presents in an emergency at an A&E, and there is a decision taken with them and their family that they might be better being treated at a specialist centre and require a transfer, then we are developing a clinically led new in effect hospital transport service, and the specification for that is being developed at the moment by Tom's team. The second is a commitment that we will introduce a free bus service between the hospitals, and what we're particularly picking out in consultation is how might that work best, and that's partly responding to, we've already done work on analysing public transport options, and I'm sure many of you will know that they're not great between hospital sites, and so the commitment here is around extended hours, but particularly we're for the bus service to operate, but we're particularly getting feedback on other locations where it might make sense, and clearly there's no pre-existing data set which answers that for us, so that's a key part of the consultation. So finally, just to go back to process, what happens next? Just to reiterate again, this isn't, I hope, it doesn't feel as though these proposals have kind of sprung up from nowhere. We've been working at these since very earliest days in 2015, so the consultation is a culmination of a large piece of work that's been going on locally. We're clearly in box number 2, the green one, of consulting at the moment. What will then happen at the end of consultation, right at the end, is the CCGs, the 5 CCGs, clinical commissioning groups in Mid and South Essex, have formed a joint committee, and we will ask that joint committee of the CCG to make its decisions. That date isn't fixed, but it's most unlikely to be before June of this year. So going back to our beginning conversation, we still have quite a lot of time both in the formal consultation period and then afterwards to discuss and refine these proposals. And then implementation is very much phased, but it's important to note, step 4, but it's important to note that implementation can't happen for most things immediately after the decisions taken by the CCG. And the reason for that is that most of the changes that we've outlined in the consultation document require changes to the fabric of the 3 hospitals. And one piece of good news, I hope, you will have spotted, is we were successful in bidding for the funds that we need, subject to the usual approvals, but to make those infrastructure changes to the hospital. So that's new beds, new theatres, etc., across the 3 sites. But the service changes themselves, in most cases, can't be fully implemented until that building work is completed across the 3 sites. So it's important, as I say, just to note that the decision making does not immediately trigger the service change. There will then be a further period of detailed planning while that capital work is underway. If I may, Chair, could I just pause and see if my colleague Tom wants to add anything to that overview?
I think we'll see that kind of these proposals are quite similar to those that we've talked about previously, in terms of there really hasn't been any substantive change to these. Obviously, having had a number of conversations with patients, and also particularly in relation to Orsett staff at Orsett. So I did my second round of discussions with staff who work at Orsett today, actually. I think a few things have arisen from that. So in regard to Orsett specifically, there's clearly questions around what is the best configuration of the movement of the services out of Orsett into the IMCs. That we need to get further input from local communities about, in terms of how best can we make that work, both from the sufficient critical mass in order to be able to deliver a good service, but also in terms of ensuring that there is the right level of accessibility to those services. So that's a key thing that has come through to me. The second thing that we've had a lot of conversations about is about the actually less about the emergency inter-hospital transfer service, but more how can we build the most effective possible service for families, carers, loved ones of people who may have to go to a different hospital as a result of these proposals being implemented. And what has become quite clear, I think, to me, is that I think the proposals as currently outlined within the consultation around a service that just goes to the 3 hospital sites is insufficient, because actually in some parts of the patch here it's already difficult enough to get to Belston Hospital, let alone getting to Belston Hospital and then getting to a different hospital. So one of the things that we are very much hoping to focus on in terms of the community sessions that we're having with patients is saying, well, where best do you think that service should move to, be it certain transport hubs, be it certain community centres, and to work that through so we can get that proposal so it's fit for purpose and works for local residents. I think the other thing which Andy touched on in terms of the proposals for hospital services, what we are trying to do with the proposals that we're making for hospital services is to try to tackle those areas where we know that currently we cannot consistently provide the level of specialist cover and support for patients that we would like to do and national guidance recommends that we should do. So if you take stroke services, currently all 3 hospitals provide pretty good stroke care. The thing that we really struggle with is being able to provide the necessary level of really intense therapy and nursing support for stroke people, for people who suffer from a stroke 7 days a week, 24/7. And we know from evidence that if you get that sort of support in that first 72 hours, hopefully you don't have to stay in hospital any longer than that, and we can get you home and we can get you support in your local community. So that's clearly a much better outcome for that person, because actually they have a significantly reduced disability at the end of that process. But also actually it's a good use of hospital resources, because actually they're in hospital for 72 hours, they're not in hospital for 14 days. And so those are the areas that we've really tried to focus on in terms of the specialist service changes. And I think the other thing also, actually, which Andy also said, is also this won't be a flick of a switch change. So it isn't that, the consultation will conclude, there will be a decision made by the CCGs, and then suddenly all of these things will change overnight. This will be a process probably over 5 to 7 years before these changes come into effect. And that will give us an opportunity to learn and adapt as we begin to implement these changes. So if there are any problems, we can pause and we can revisit and change that. And then also just to underline in regard to Orsett, our commitments that we've previously discussed here around the fact that we would not seek to relocate any services from Orsett until there are new facilities available still stands, and that hasn't changed at all. So that's been very clear in the conversations I've had with local groups, it's been very clear in the conversations I've had with staff. So we would not seek to move any of the services out of Orsett until such time that the new facilities are in place. Anything for you, Andy? No. I think we're happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Andrew and Tom. So let's open this up to questions. Councillor Redsall.
Thank you, Chair. It's good to actually, if you live up to all this, you're on a winner in Thurrock. I don't probably think we will, but I'm not quite happy about the 5 to 7 years. I mean, we need to get it a bit quicker than that. It's good to hear about the strokes, because it is in the first 48 hours that people, you can say somebody will get better. If they're not seen, that's when they go downhill. Dialysis, not much has been mentioned about dialysis. I think they do it at Orsett, am I right, Mandy?
Yes,
yeah.
They do.
So Orsett do dialysis, but I've not seen anything that's come through on here. There is a little bit, I think, on the bottom, but perhaps you can answer me about that. The bus service, you said, Andrew, we will. I'd like really to know who we are, who's going to provide this free bus service. very good if it can happen, if we're talking, but it's who's going to pay for it, you know, to run. But I think that's a good thing, because people have to get to Grays, change, get somewhere else and change, and then get somewhere else. So it does become, you know, if they're ill anyway, it's not very good for them to have to do that. So that I can see, you know, would be that would be one good thing if we could bring that forward. That would be the start of a lot of. I'm on the bus committee, and just see people complaining about how we get somewhere is a, you know, all the time. It's all we get. So that and the dialysis and the stroke, I would just like to see this come to fruition a bit better than 5 to 7 years, because we're going to let people down otherwise. Thank you.
So I think we'll try and go as fast as we can, which is safe. I think so. Obviously, so clearly, as Andy said, that there is a challenge around how quickly we can release the money in order to do the construction work that we'll need to do across the hospitals, because we have to go through the Treasury 5-case process, which isn't the slickest process in the world. I think it's probably fair to say. So clearly we will go through that process, and so we will make the changes we can, but actually there may be some limitations as a result of, you know, drawing down the capital funding in order to be able to do the construction work. On the dialysis question, you're quite right that Orsett does have a dialysis unit. The plan for that is that we are going to do some specific engagement work with the people who use the dialysis unit, because and Kim's got dates, good, because we've been working on some dates with Kim to because it's a fairly static group of patients who use dialysis, so it makes sense to go and talk to them about what they think in terms of where a dialysis unit should be located in the future. So we'll be engaging on that. In terms of the other dialysis units that are in place, there's no proposals to change or move any of those. On the bus service, within the financial modelling that we had to do in order to get through all the necessary authorisations to get to this point, we've built in an allowance for the cost of operating the bus service. What we haven't made any decisions about, and I think we will want to work with partners on this, is who's the right people to provide that service. So it could be that we work with community transport, it could be that we work with other partners in order to deliver that service, but we haven't got to that point yet in terms of saying, well, they would be the people who would do it. But clearly, once we kind of know what it is and what people think the best specification for that service is, we'll then go and have some conversations about working with a partner to put that in place.
On the dialysis, there is a lot that can be done at home, isn't there? So just clarifying that. Bus services, in some villages, they do phone a bus, which is so good and works. You know, so you phone the bus, it picks you up at a certain time, and will bring you back at a certain time. So if that can work in a village, you know, of 5 to 1,000 people in a village, then that's a good thing. You know, it's that's all really. Thank you, Chair.
And that's what you get when you have a councillor that's on the bus committee. Councillor Cliff Holloway.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And carrying on from my colleague, Councillor Redseal, once again, I must press you on the transportation. I mean, you'll be aware, of course, that we're under the most immense pressure from our residents under what they see as a very, very suspicious proposal, especially for our elderly population, on what is forthcoming. This is probably second only to the Lower Thames crossing in the focus that it's given. I press you again, once again, in relation to the bus. As you'll be aware, since 2003, the population over 80 has increased by 40%. Now, these are the people who will probably need care most focused, and to lay their suspicions or their fears, because that's what they've got with these proposals, fears, accessibility is going to be a key priority on this thing going forward. Now, I must press you again. You've mentioned running between hospitals, and I get that, but it's the other locations and how you would nail that kind of funding specifically that I'd like you to come forward with. You've obviously been out and given these proposals some thought, but if we're going out to our people, we have to ask very, very specific questions, and at the moment, this particular thing on transportation and accessibility is still very vague. No.
I think in terms of the transportation and the other locations, I think the thing that we are very keen to hear through the consultation process is what do local residents feel would be a good transport service for them. Clearly we're talking about kind of this sort of the Darla ride kind of model or something like that, through to our kind of a fixed service. Because you have to remember this service would complement existing patient transport services that are already in place across the health service for a number of people. However, obviously the challenge with NHS patient transport services is that there is quite an extensive eligibility criteria in order to be able to access those services. So I think there's sort of a chicken and egg situation in terms of we need to get local views around what best configuration would and what does a good transport service for them look like. So I'd really encourage you to ask your constituents around to provide us with feedback on their thoughts on that. In terms of the second issue, the first issue which you raised, which is around kind of frail older people and people living with kind of multiple comorbidities. So within these proposals, and Mandy might want to come in, clearly what we want to be able to do within the wider proposals around working with general practice and putting in place more expertise around general practice is be able to provide many more of the services that patients currently have to go to hospital for around the local GP, and also help reduce some of the confusion that local patients have when they're having to go and see their diabetes consultant one day, their respiratory consultant another day, and somebody else, all of which aren't seeing that person in the round and the issues that are facing them. So, because we believe that actually by strengthening general practice and getting our consultants working alongside general GPs in the integrated medical centres, we can that can lead to people being able to better manage their health, which might mean that they don't end up having an emergency, which means they have to come into hospital. Clearly, in the instance where they do come into hospital, clearly one of the commitments that we've made is that for the vast majority of frail older people, their care will remain local as it currently is. So the beds will be there, the A&E will be there, the diagnostic facilities will be there. In those small instances, say where you suffer from a stroke, or where you might need some really specialist input, there may then be a decision with that individual and with that individual's family that it might be better to move them somewhere else for their care. However, in order for their rehabilitation, or if they need a longer stay in hospital, the plan would always be to move those people back to their local hospital, so they remain as local as they possibly can. So we're talking about a very small slither, but very important slither in terms of care in hospitals, but obviously our aim is through the better management, the better communication between health professionals, which I think the integrated medical centres provide us with, actually we can help mean that people don't need to go to hospital as much as they currently do. I hope that goes some way to answering your question.
I'll just come back on the same subject. I can jump in, John. Having paid a few visits to hospital for relatives in the recent times, one of the issues sometimes, not always, but sometimes, is that you'll go to visit a relative in the ward where you were the day before, and you'll turn up and they're not there, and no one knows where they are, and it's trying to find someone to find out. That can be an issue when they're in the same hospital at times. I think it's really, really important that when you're going to transfer from one hospital to another hospital, that the information and the communication is absolutely A1, superb, because if it isn't, you're going to have an awful lot of really disgruntled and distressed people. So I just wonder how you're going to manage that, because it's not just a case of the communication. Clearly, if they're going to go to say, from Basildon to Broomfield, I guess you're going to have to work out in advance how many days you expect them to be there, and if they do need to come back to Basildon, you would need to make sure there's a bed available to them. That needs some very, very tight scheduling. As I say, I've had experience where that doesn't work particularly smoothly at one hospital. So how would you cope with that on a day-to-day basis?
So it's a really good point, and we do currently, and it's mainly linked to the current bed pressures that we have, we do end up kind of moving people between wards, and that's not good for the patient, and it's not necessarily good for the relative, but it's just through the necessity of being able to get the right bed for sicker patients. So there's a couple of things we're doing. Within the 118 million that we've been allocated through the Treasury process, 28 million of that is in relation to IT and improving our IT infrastructure across the 3 hospitals. And one of the things that we are pushing ahead with already on that is something that's called teletracking. And the idea behind teletracking is what it allows us to do is to move to an electronic bed management system across the 3 hospitals, which can be managed in a single place. So we know where every single patient is within the hospital. There's no reliance on paper forms and bits and pieces like that, and we can make sure that, so when a relative comes to reception at any hospital and says, I'm looking for my mum or my father, actually we can pinpoint them there and then, and actually we can pinpoint them if they're not in the ward and they're having a scan or something. So that's quite a significant investment that we're already making across the 3 trusts, and that will start to go live at Southend in June, and then be rolled out over the following 2 hospitals over the subsequent months. So we're trying to take some steps to resolve that. Clearly, the other important thing, and this will have to be part of the protocols and procedures that we have within each of the 3 emergency departments, is how can we make sure that we have good quality conversations with patients and with relatives who are making a decision about, what's best for their mum in terms of moving them to a specialist centre. So there's something about what support do we need to put in place for ED staff to be able to have that conversation in what is a very stressful time. And the second thing is also being really, really clear in terms of the criteria by which we think somebody would benefit from going to a specialist centre. And that's all being worked on currently by our clinicians. And so there's clear information about expectation about how long someone might have to be in a specialist centre before being brought back to the local hospital. So yeah, it's a really good point, and one we have to make sure that we get right.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Let's hope the IT's up to it. But, Councillor Redsall.
Thanks, Chair. It was only a small point, really, and it's not really. I don't want to get at anybody, but if I was reading this, which I have been, I'd think 65. I'm finished. Because it either uses 55 as that's it, it's a downhill path, or 65 and it's over.
We're all done there.
Yeah. A little tiny bit said, we're starting with your family, there is more we can do to stay healthy. There's nothing really in this document, and what I'm saying, it's nothing really to do with us, but we perhaps should be, as a whole, looking more at not getting people into a home or into a care place or a hospital. We should actually be looking at the building of places where people can actually enjoy the community. We do in lots of other places, we build on golf courses, so we give people something to do, to mix, and we're not. I've got many of my residents, I've got a very elderly population, but they're in their home all day by themselves alone, and it isn't because they're ill. It's loneliness kills, and because they're not speaking to anybody, that's it. I'm not saying that's the people but we ought to be getting to people before they get to that part and start looking as a council for building things that are going to bring them into the community and not take them out of the community. I only wanted to have that say. Thank you.
I think that's a fair point, but that's probably not related to the STP tonight, but I know where you're coming from. Thank you. Councillor Victoria Holloway.
Do you want to come in on that point?
May I come in on that very briefly? Would that be right? And if I may just flick back a few slides. It's a really excellent point, and it is part of the reason why I showed this slide first of all, because initially when we were drafting our consultation document about the whole STP, we did include kind of the entirety, and a lot of what we're planning, and obviously for here you're very familiar with it, is all around the work around the 4 centres that we've been discussing. That's exactly what a lot of the whole STP focuses on, is this much wider agenda than the hospitals of sense of place, sense of community, how we combat loneliness, how we integrate support services, whether statutory or voluntary or not. That's a key part of the STP. Now, when we first included all of that in the consultation document, we've already had feedback tonight about the document not being as clear as it could be. It was very, very long. And so we focused the document now what we're really consulting on, which is the hospital part. But your point is exactly right, that the key, really, of the whole STP is not the small number of patients that we're proposing to transfer, which is very small. It's very important, but it's very small. It's the much bigger picture of how do we deliver some things you've just been describing there, which is what this slightly fancy slide tries to kind of outline.
Roger.
Can I just add to that, because I know Councillor Redselov and I have had many discussions about this over a long period of time, and just to say that although this is obviously an NHS consultation, that the local authority is very much a partner in this process, and the whole concept behind the integrated medical centres is not that they're just a GP plus, they're something quite different. So they're very much about the developing on the community hub model. 2 of them are likely to have libraries based within them. We're looking about new ways of working in terms of new models of care. There will be places where people can come and there'll be a cafe. There'll be a whole range of services there, so that people actually will see them as a local resource. They'll be open 7 days a week with extended hours in the evening. So I think I just try to reassure you that very much built into the concept here is that reaching out to people, building stronger communities, health and social care working together. So very much, with third sector organisations as well. So I fully accept the point that you're making, and it's not just about moving things from one place to another place, it's delivering something quite different at a local level.
Councillor Victoria Holloway this time.
Thank you, Chair. And if I may, I've got a few questions, if that's okay with the Chair and the committee. I guess, Andy, Tom, would you like me to give you a question one by one and answer as I go, or do you want them all together? Okay, all together. Okay, great. First of all, my points, I guess, overall, firstly, is to say that this document that's actually gone out to residents is actually, I think, quite readable, but in comparison to a lot of NHS consultations. It's actually really well done, and I think quite easy for the average Joe to read. So I just want to flag that, because a lot of what I read actually from NHS England I can't understand. So that's appreciative. Obviously, this is a summary of an enormous STP document, and ultimately, I think the STP document is that we've got is fundamentally a hospital reconfiguration. It very much is focused on hospitals and acute care. And I think what I would like to know is where are the other details, actually, Andrew, that you mentioned on before as follow-up to Councillor Redsel's points about kind of a wider range of care, funding and providing for primary care, because obviously ultimately we don't actually even want people in hospital, but without kind of a chunk of work on primary care and its serious consideration about how it's funded, how can we really make this happen? Because that's, we don't want really people in hospitals. And also I was quite disappointed not to see again another considerable chunk on mental health and social care again, because they're really key parts of a journey. So I wonder, first of all, what work is going to be done on that. My next point would be with regards to there is, I guess, a vagueness on some services, which obviously is the point of the consultation. I think there are some points which it's very clear what is going to happen, and residents can say, whether they're happy or not. But there are some where it says that there are services that will be delivered still to be discussed. There's a few of those, and I know obviously you've mentioned some of them, that Kim is going to be talking to some people, especially about renal services, for example. The first question on that is, one, how have you gone about consulting with the groups to make sure you're consulting with the right groups in that process? But also, bearing in mind some of the sections' vagueness, how will residents be able to respond once firm decisions have been made on the sections that are currently a bit vague? Will there be another opportunity? I hate to use the term another consultation, but what will happen when people get firmed up plans on the bits that aren't so firm now? Also, I wanted to ask, is it possible that some services could be relocated out of the borough? I appreciate the very clear steer that nothing will be moved out of Orsett until there are proper services to new facilities to move them into. But does that mean, just for clarification, that the services in Orsett will be moved to the IMCs in Thurrock? So everything in the hospital will be provided in Thurrock for Thurrock residents. And the last question I have is, what will happen with the capital receipts for the Orsett Hospital land once it's sold? So obviously it's a considerable amount of money that I'm sure that will raise. Will all of that capital money be guaranteed to be reinvested in Thurrock for Thurrock residents, or will some of that money from that Orsett land leave Thurrock? That's all, and appreciate the understanding from the committee.
So if I answer perhaps the kind of the hospital related questions, and I might want to hand over to Mandy, who might want to talk a little bit more about the kind of the health and social care integration elements, if that's all right. So in terms of the question you ask around kind of vagueness, so I think they are areas where we do want to get more views from the local population about their thoughts in those areas, and also we do want to get wider clinical views, not just from the hospital clinicians, but also from clinicians who don't work in the hospital. And so very much what we want to try and do is refine the kind of the purpose. So we think this is the direction of travel, this is what we mean. The exact criteria and things like that is the things that we need to work through. I would hope that we don't end up having to have another consultation, both personally and professionally. But one of the points actually which was made at a recent public engagement event we had this week was potentially the value of, following a decision being made by the CCGs, actually doing some events to explain the outcome of that decision locally, so people understand what the outcome was and what the next steps are and what the indicative timeframes might be in terms of when things might change and how they can be kept informed around that, which I thought was a very good point and one which I think we will take on board. In terms of the services currently based at Orsett, and in terms of could they be located outside of the borough, the assumption is not, unless we get some sort of definitive feedback through this process that actually would indicate that services shouldn't be provided in Orsett. Clearly, one of the things that we've talked about previously is a number of the services at Orsett are not just used by Thurrock residents, but are used by Basildon residents in particular, Basildon Town residents. So the parallel engagement that we're doing in Basildon is around of the services you currently use in Orsett, what would you like to see in Basildon? The only one area that we are seeking views on is around musculoskeletal services. And there's a balance here which we're very keen to get local residents' views on. So, and the balance of those views is that there is one model which says that we would continue to provide outpatient services within, say, the 4 integrated medical centres and within centres in Basildon and Billericay and elsewhere, but you would still have to go separately separately, say for an MRI scan or a CT to Basildon Hospital, as you currently have to in terms of the scan. The question that we're really posing and around this is saying, do you prefer that as a service model, or would you prefer all of those services to be under one roof, and therefore you have some form of one-stop shop? The issue with that is, in order to concentrate all the right specialists together in the same place, and so you can go and have your MRI and see your rheumatology consultant and your pain management consultant and your orthopaedic consultant, might mean that we could only provide that in one place. And that's a balance. And I'm very, very keen to hear the views of local people in terms of what would you prefer most? Would it be being able to maybe having to travel a bit further but do that once, or actually maybe having to go to a couple of different places over a period of time? So that is an open question as part of this process. We're keen to get people's input and views on. In terms of the capital receipts from Orsett, so clearly we're a long way away from there being any sort of capital receipt from Orsett, but what we would hope to be able to do is to somehow reinvest that back into Orsett. Now, that might not be in the form of a building, because as you remember, the buildings will have to be built before we move the services out, but we're thinking in terms of equipment and other facilities which could be used to kit out some of the integrated medical centres in terms of ultrasound machines, x-rays, other things that and other equipment we might need. So that would be our hope and aim through this process. I don't know, Mandy, did you want to talk about the other points?
Segue in there, thank you very much. I would, of course, and you'd expect me to just refer everybody back to For Thurrock in Thurrock, which is our strategy that we've all worked through over the last 2 years, which very much describes our commitment to that which Roger described around integrated delivery. I think, Councillor Holloway, the area I picked up on when I was listening to you speaking is mental health. And again, I will remind everybody that Thurrock leads for the STP on mental health. And again, going back to our magazine, here is a nice piece on mental health. And this particular service, which is a primary care mental health service, we are only one of 10 CCGs in the country that has been funded to provide this extended psychological therapist service for people with long-term conditions. The provider of our psychological therapies, both this enhanced service and the Recovery College, is completely embedded in primary care currently, and we have mental health psychologists, etc., in the multidisciplinary teams working in our localities. This will build into our healthy living centres. Just also to add to what Tom was saying, so we're thinking about services, particularly outpatients, for example, that currently are delivered from Orsett. We have mapped with Tom and his team outpatient services that exist in the hospital at the moment, which will come out into the healthy living centres. So it's much wider than just the services that we're seeing at Orsett. But where there is vagueness, it is because, as Tom beautifully articulated, we want to know, do you want everything here but you have to go over there, or do you just want it all over there? So I think that's where what we don't want to do is go into a consultation where the answers are there and people are going to say, you've already decided. We need some fine-tuning on our thinking that comes from talking to people locally.
Just to may complete the piece on a couple of the points you made earlier on. Thank you for the feedback on the document, and I'd concur about some other documents not being so clear always. You asked about the wider story. So on the website that we set up just for the consultation, we've put, as well as obviously the document itself, there's quite a big range of additional documentation. So that sets out kind of this picture in a bit more detail of exactly what's planned around the STP. There's also just for committee members' awareness, there's a lot more information, things like the clinical evidence base. There's more detail on what's going on in each of the 5 CCG areas, in addition to the consultation document. And I think the final part you asked about was primary care, and I'll look across at Mandy at this as well. But we are initiating a piece of work at the moment across all 5 CCGs, but working with all 5 to really get into probably more detail than we've been able to so far. And I know a huge amount of work's been done in Thurrock already, but on developing primary care, because clearly these services are not separate; they link together. And the stronger our primary care is, the stronger some of the localities are. The stronger the localities are, the greater the chance that the pressures on hospital are eased. So we're actually right now kicking off quite a big piece of work, not for consultation obviously at this point, but on how we develop more detail around the specific primary care challenge that we do definitely face in this part of the world.
You certainly can, of course.
I don't want to take up too much more of the committee's time, but appreciate your responses, and I think that's really, really helpful. With regards to, I think vagueness probably was the wrong word. Obviously, it's a consultation, so that's the point. It needs to be pretty vague. But I think it's very important, as you said, Tom, about asking people where they want the services to be delivered, but also explaining what that means. I just look at one of the pages in the document, page 30, and it said that as you've already said, you want services closer to home. Hundreds of Thurrock residents took part with feedback indicating that majority of those surveyed welcomed the development of community-based facilities for health and care services. Well, of course, like everyone would say yes to that, but the next line to that is, but this will mean it's being provided somewhere else, or this hospital closing. So I think you have to, be very careful when you're, talking to people, to give them the exact reality of what they're getting. Ultimately saying, yes, it'll be all under one roof, which is fantastic, but you'll obviously have to travel further, and this means the closure of X, Y, Z. So just to caveat that point. And similarly, just to say, I think it's really good to hear that any kind of, obviously it's very far in the future, but any money that is made from Orsett Hospital will be staying for residents in Orsett Hospital and all of the services, whether that's, whatever that may be, we don't know yet. Obviously we'll be deciding that, but I think that will be a real key point for residents, and making sure that everything that is in Thurrock now remains in Thurrock. So having those promises are really helpful. And then once again, just to highlight, obviously with primary care, it's great to see that big piece of work is happening, and I think I'll keep asking about that and seeing what time frame you'll be working under, because I think that's something we'll want to follow closely. But I think we're very lucky in Thurrock to have all of the plans we have in place about primary care and mental health and social care. I was just wondering about broader STP, but we're very lucky to have all of those policies. I acknowledge that from our teams. Again, thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Holloway. I think we've got Councillor Redsaw wants to have another question.
I'm not going to say anything, and then somebody says something and it sparks something off. Only it's something very small, but obviously 2 new places are going to be built. Is it Purfleet and Tilbury? And Corringham, yeah. I've got a worry with Thurrock Hospital because it's in my ward, and we already have a problem in Thurrock Hospital with the parking. I know that's something that would come up if it was going through planning or anything like that, but there's a lot of room out the back, but the hospital doesn't want people going to the back to use any car parks, and that's the trouble we've got, because we've got a very small place in that part of Thurrock, and on that road it causes a lot of problems. So I'm just hoping that's going to be within the planning thing, will be looked at, because it's an awkward place to be, and the more facilities, it's not only NHS things in there, it's other businesses going in there as well. That's what's causing the problem. The smoking outside.
Thank you, Councillor Redsaw. Just one last quick little thing.
Would it help if I just say where we are with the integrated medical centres, just very briefly?
I was just about to ask a question sort of related, then I'll bring you in after me. Can we assume that the staff that are currently working in Orsett, when the services are moved out to the IMCs, could we just assume that the staff will move out to the IMCs as and when that happens?
Yes, so that's the assumption that they would move out. The only exception to that is so there are two principal service areas which aren't patient-facing, which are currently based at Orsett. So one of which is the sterile services unit. So they are the people who clean all the equipment for theatres and things like that. And the second is there is also we have a medical records office also at Orsett. What we are looking at for those services and across the three hospitals is there any opportunity to bring those services together or for them to work differently? So it's not a patient-facing service, but for the 95% of the other staff in terms of who are providing frontline clinical care, yes. Obviously, the other question, which is I'm probably asked most frequently when I go to Orsett, is around the tea bar. So Roger has committed there to be the cafe at least one of the integrated medical centres, because I do get asked that an awful lot. So clinical facing staff will be needed to work in those new facilities, and that's the commitment that we've made to them.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tom. Roger.
As there's been quite a bit of mention of the integrated medical centre, I'll just very briefly say where we are, because they are absolutely fundamental to delivering this whole project. And we signed a memorandum of understanding, all the partners around the sort of health and social care table, about 9 months ago. Nearly sent Ian into an early grave because he wrote and did a lot of work to put it together. But we're all committed to developing the four integrated medical centres. The Tilbury one is the most advanced. We have already commissioned the design team. It's been through Cabinet. We are hoping to get a business case back to Cabinet in the late summer, autumn of this year. There's quite a few processes within the NHS that I must admit I don't fully understand in terms of outline business cases and full business cases. Then we're hoping to work in parallel, so at the same time the business case goes through our members, at the same time as near as we can get the business case through the NHS England. We are fairly well advanced with Purfleet Centre Regeneration Limited in terms of the discussions around the Purfleet Integrated Medical Centre as well. The sites has been identified, and it's part of the development agreement that we have with PCRL. The Corringham, Stamford and Hope one is a site that Nelft have purchased, and they are taking a business case through their board again, hopefully in the summer. As Councillor Redson quite rightly said, the Grays Centre may be slightly different, although hopefully it'll have some of the core components of the other integrated medical centres. But you can see some of the components already there. We already have the joint reablement team. There's the hub, the out-of-hours service. So some of the components are already there. So it might be a slightly different version than the other ones that are all going to be purpose-built. But the core components about outpatients, having primary care services there, and local authority services. So the local area coordinators would operate out of there. We're looking about how we can sort of have sort of area-based work within our social work teams. So we're looking at developing very much a place-based service now, and the integrated medical centres are all part of that. So none of this has landed yet. There's no signed contract, but there is an enormous amount of work and commitment to make this happen.
Thank you, Roger. Any other member wish to speak? No? Okay. Well, it's one of those, isn't it? I think it's clear that some of the communication early days has not been fantastic, but obviously I think there's a commitment for that to improve from now on in, which is good. Amongst all the imponderables that we got moving forward, I think the direction of travel seems to be the right one. I think Basildon certainly seems to be coming out of it quite well if it all goes the way it's planned at the moment. So I think from Thurrock's point of view, our plan seems a good one, and wait and see what the end of the consultation brings to sort of fine up some of the details. I'm sure we'll come back later on when it's all finished to go over it again. But for now, thank you very much for the presentation. It's been most informative, and with that we shall move on to item 7 on the agenda, which is the Joint Health Scrutiny Committee proposals, and I think that's yours, Roger.
Thank you, Chair. we discussed this, if you remember, I think at our September meeting. The regulations, and I think it'd be fair to say that the members at the time weren't particularly keen on it. However, the regulations are very clear. When a consultation, NHS consultation exercise of this nature, which is of a wider geographical area than just one locality or one local authority, it automatically triggers off something called a joint scrutiny committee, made up of the scrutiny committees of those areas. So Essex and Southend have already had some initial preparatory meetings because previously Thurrock declined to be involved in that, although the invitation had always stood. Up to now we haven't been participating in those, but now that the formal consultation has started, as I say, the regulations are absolutely clear. It does require the establishment of a joint committee. So there's no discretion over that. Where there is discretion is over what's called the power referral to the Secretary of State. That is a power that it can be delegated to the joint committee, or it can be retained by the individual scrutiny committees. And that is where, if there is a substantial variation in service, where the scrutiny committee is unhappy with the proposal, it can refer the matter to the Secretary of State. So Essex HOSC and Southend HOSC have also decided to retain that power, but they have agreed to establish the joint committee. You've got the draft terms of reference attached to the paper tonight that haven't been sort of signed off yet, but as I say, they are being discussed at the preliminary meetings that are being held. So I'll leave it there. Jenny, I know, has been in contact with her colleagues in Southend and Essex as well, so might be able to say if there's any questions about the sort of times of the meetings and frequency of meetings and things like that. But the recommendation is in line with the regulations that Thurrock joins the joint committee, and in line with the draft terms of reference, appoints 4 members to represent Thurrock HOSC at that meeting, but it doesn't delegate the power referral.
Thank you, Roger. I think as Chair I probably ought to have the first word on this, because I initially were totally against this idea. I know that at the committee at the time we all were, on the basis of it being yet another layer of bureaucracy that is probably not needed. To further compound matters, and I'm still against it, by the way. My attitude hasn't changed, but unfortunately, legislation or government rules say otherwise. But from taking anything else away from it, I firmly believe that we are not professional counsellors. Most of us work. The next meeting has been scheduled for the same day as our full council meeting. I think, is it Southend, Jenny?
Yes.
Southend, and it's at 5 o'clock. Now, I think the majority of the panel would have trouble getting to that meeting. I have suggested that we almost demand that the meetings, if we have to do it, that they must be held in the evening at 7 o'clock starts, to give 4 members a chance to get there. The other issue is that if 2 of us don't make it, then they are in quorum and the meeting can't go ahead anyway. So I think we have a problem. Because, with the greatest will in the world, even if we thought it's a fantastic idea, let's do it, can we get 4 members that are quite happy to give up half a day's work to go and sit on a committee, probably in Southend, not necessarily, we might arrange one here, I don't know, to oversee what is in effect an unwanted layer of bureaucracy as far as I'm concerned. So that's my point of view. I'm not impressed with this in the slightest. However, I'm quite happy to take views of other members of the committee. Councillor Cliff Holloway.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I take it in relation to questions. We can raise things on the appendix, of course. That's attached to Agenda Item 7.
Absolutely.
Okay, that'll be fine. Thank you, Chair. Roger, you understand that we're going into this kicking and screaming because we can kind of see where this is going, so to speak. And as the chairman has quite rightly pointed out, you are addressing here, the lay membership. Now, I'm just going to go straight to the appendix, if that's all right with you, because I just want to ask a couple of specific questions. First of all, in relation to section 2 at the top of page 46, clause 2.5, and I think it's best if I read it out to you. Notwithstanding any of the above, the relevant parent bodies may still exercise an overview role in relation to STPs, engaging in governance issues, strategic oversight and coordination across the STP footprints. Roger, to the lay membership, I have no idea what that means in context with the previous 4 paragraphs. I wonder if you could help me with that.
Right, okay, here goes. Mandy won't answer this, but no. My interpretation of that is that the SCP is a much bigger body in terms of there's a program board, there's various structures in terms of the various work streams sitting underneath it, and what I interpret that to mean is that individual local authorities and individual CCGs and individual health watchers, for that matter, still will participate in that wider STP governance structure in their own right. They're not in any way going in with Essex and Southend in any joint arrangement. So my understanding of that is what that is saying is that every other bit of the STP process, apart from the Joint Scrutiny Committee, will still be done by the individual sovereign bodies. Anyone else? I'm looking out for help from my colleagues.
No, I would. Microphone, please.
Thorough cost from not being subsumed into something bigger, so you still retain your independence.
Yeah.
Am I okay to go again? Chair, just moving to section 6. Throughout the whole of the appendix, it refers to the word consultative and consultation, which is exactly where we are, and throughout all of the documents that are in front of the councillors and the committee tonight, it only refers in paragraph 6.2 at the bottom the word negotiation. And once again, if I can just read the bottom line, the Joint Committee will consider the need for further negotiation and discussions. Just how much power do you think that committee, under the guise of negotiation prior to any referral to the Secretary of State, how much power would that committee have?
But my understanding is that it has all the powers of a scrutiny committee, other than the referral to the Secretary of State. So it has the power to request officers to attend. It has the power to comment on documents. It has the right of access to documents. So it retains all of the powers of an individual scrutiny committee that you have here, apart from the referral to the Secretary of State.
Do you mind if I just could I push you just one bit further on that, Roger? Sorry, I don't want to pin you down, but as you know, the opinion of the council is we require reassurances before we take this forward. When we deal with officers across the board, they are senior officers appropriate to our level, whoever sits on that committee. Do they have the power to negotiate as apart from consult? Consult pretty much turns around and say, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to consult you about it. If we get to a point that we need to negotiate on, and I mean negotiate in the truest form of the word, something that the committee and the officers of the NHS need to do they have that power under that clause prior to any referral?
I'm not. I think I think I agree with you. I think the word negotiation is perhaps a bit misleading. I don't know if you've been, Andy, involved in any of the discussion of the other HOS there, because I'm not sure negotiation is necessarily the right word, because HOS doesn't negotiate, it scrutinises, it responds to, it interrogates, it asks questions, it doesn't negotiate in that sense. So I don't know, Andy, if there's been discussions on that at all elsewhere.
So no, we've not had discussions with other scrutiny committees, although we've got a meeting on Monday, which I think you're coming to, Roger, when we can talk about it. My perspective on this, obviously we've looked at this as well, and Roger and I have had a few discussions, is the joint scrutiny function is obviously bringing together the three with members from each for the purposes of this consultation, so not for the wider STP. But what's kind of unique about it, I suppose, is post the 9th of March, so post-consultation, we as a programme to the joint committee share our analysis of what we've heard to that joint committee, and then at that point that joint committee can come back to us as a programme with its reflections and observations and indeed possibly recommendations. So I agree with Roger, kind of it's not about really negotiation, but if there were elements that the joint committee, having reviewed it all, were unhappy with as part of a response to us, could then make recommendations that we would then consider and come back to the joint committee on. Does that help? Is that any clear?
Thank you, Andrew. Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair. Just a clarification, please. This is about point 9.2 regarding report recommendations. It says final versions of report or reports will be agreed by the Joint Committee Chairman and 2 Vice Chairmen. Are these Chairman and Vice Chairman from the delegates were sent, or are these people additional to the members?
I think it says elsewhere that the chair will be from one authority and the 2 vice chairs will be from the other authorities. I'm just trying to find it where it says that. Yeah, so the 3.5, so the joint committee members will elect a chairman and 2 vice chairmen first meeting, 1 from each authority, so that each authority is represented.
Right, thank you.
Councillor Redsill.
Thank you, Chair. Hate to say it, Graham. I agree with you, because I haven't changed my views from before, and I think this is just going to be another layer that we're going to have to deal with. And how we deal with it, I don't know. I just don't, as you said, making the first meeting on a night when we've got full council, no way could you get to Southend and back. That's an impossibility. It's just going to be something else that we're going to have to... I haven't changed my views from before, so I don't agree.
Thank you, Joy. Councillor Victoria Holloway.
Yeah, I agree. Obviously, nothing has changed since we first seen it, but obviously, thanks to government that we have to do this. I think there's the first thing that I query is just the weight of this, the joint HOSC versus our own HOSC. For example, so we as Thurrock agree one thing, and then we go to the joint HOSC and we as Thurrock think one thing, and then Southend and Ethics think something else. Is that HOSC given more authority as it's got the 3 organisations? So if they say something that is against what we think here in Thurrock, how is that weighted? I guess because what makes this any different to having any individual HOSC meetings if we then all go and then discuss the same thing again? I don't understand why. Well, one, we obviously don't know why we have to do this, but I don't understand how that will be weighted and if that's going to unfairly disadvantage us. And then, secondly, the practicalities, obviously, about how we get around that. And is there any guidance on kind of substitute members and things like that? I guess.
Okay. I mean, I think the points that people are making about the timing of the meeting, Jenny has made that on a number of occasions. It might be worth being more formal on that and putting that in writing, because I think we recognise that will be difficult for thorough members if it is during the day. I mean, what I can do is just point, I suppose, to what the regulations say in 2.3, where it says only the Joint Committee may respond to the consultation, and only the Joint Committee may exercise the power to require the provision of information by the relevant NHS body. So in terms of putting in a formal written response, if you like, to the document, it will be through the Joint Committee process. The only thing that isn't being delegated to the Joint Committee, and that is what the regulations say. I'm not saying that that's an officer suggestion or anything. That is very clearly what the legal advice is. The only thing that you don't have to delegate to the Joint Committee is the power referral.
Okay, so just to clarify then, that there won't be anything brought to this HOSC regarding to the STP again. Everything now with regards to the STP will go through this committee.
My view is that almost we will have a twin-track process. I think almost inevitably, officers, as they have done tonight, officers from the STP will be coming here, and I'm sure the committee will express its views either here or through full council. But in terms of like a formal response, collectively, I think we're not quite sure how that will work, but collectively there will be a response from the Joint Committee, from the Joint HOSC, to the full STP document.
And I think just on practicalities, I think it would be good, if that's okay with the chair and the committee, to write a formal letter to request our what we need with regards to times. And I think if we can come to some, I guess it's a negotiation about, first off, the times of the meetings and locations. I hope maybe locations rotated. So and also if we can rotate the times, because I'm sure, I don't know about any other work, but if we can negotiate with employers to maybe go to some meetings and not others, I don't know, this is going to have to be practically sorted out, but if we can negotiate times and places, it might be doable for us in that way.
I agree. I think we should write a letter, but I'm not saying that we should request. I think we should almost demand that we have evening meetings. I know the members of this committee well. I know the members of my group well, and I'm sure the other members here know their groups well. There are very few of us that can get to daytime meetings. The vast majority of us go to work. That's the reason we have our meetings when we do. It is simply unacceptable that this be imposed upon who, as I said earlier, we're not professionals. We do this in our spare time as it is. On a personal level, out of my 25 days annual leave, last year I had 4 days of my own. The rest of it was spent doing council work. I'm personally not prepared to give up any more time. It's just crazy that, yes, we will commit to do it. We have to. We've got no choice. But only if the meetings are at a time that we can actually get to them, and certainly on dates that we can get to them. To schedule it against one of our full council meetings, I can't believe for 1 second that the clerk of that particular session didn't realise that we were having full council that night. That somebody wasn't doing their job. They dropped the ball there, I think. So, Councillor Collins, Councillor Redsall.
I mean, we can commit to do it because we've got to do it. But who says that we're having trouble getting people on committees as it is now? I mean, even this overview and scrutiny, there's no substitutes for this at all. So if one of us doesn't turn up, there's no substitute for our group. So it's you've got to first of all get the people to go on it and commit to it, which is going to be hard. Even going to Southend in an evening meeting is going to be traffic based, because we all know how it all builds up on that way back to Southend from London. So it's, I'm on committees that meet in Chelmsford, and you have to fit that in. And as you just said, we have to fit. This is not our full-time job. We have other jobs we do, and I think we're going to find it hard to get people to commit. And I don't know where we go with that one.
Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair, and I support your comments and point of view wholeheartedly. I I thought we'd killed this thing stone dead, and now it's come back from the dead to haunt us. I'm also concerned also how this is going to affect our budgets. Can we ring fence our budgets? What's the effect going to be on our budgets in Thurrock, please?
I don't think it'll have any impact on our budgets. It's only going to be, its only purpose will be to comment on the consultation document around the SDP. It won't be scrutinising the Thurrock Council services or the CCG. Its only purpose is to is a mechanism to which is triggered off when the NHS consults on a matter that covers more than one geographical area. So it's not going to be a standing committee that's going to be scrutinising budgets, so it shouldn't have any impact on our budgets.
I do have a solution. They can send all the stuff to me and I'll comment on it for free.
It's very helpful, Councillor Collins. I'm sure they'll take that on board. Again, I don't wish to bang on about this too much, but I will. We actually are in quite a strong position, because unless there are, according to the rules of the Constitution in terms of reference, unless they get 2 councillors from Thurrock at the meeting, they're not quorate. So, you know, unless they change the timings to something we can actually get to, the whole thing's going to fall down. So I think we absolutely have to insist on meetings starting at 7 o'clock. We have to, because otherwise they can't run it. The joint host can't run by their own terms. So I think, Jenny, we can add that as a recommendation that we do. I think we should change 1.2. Agree to appoint 4 members to represent Thurrock Hosc at the joint committees meeting, so long as joint Hosc meetings commence no earlier than 7 p.m. I think we can do that. Is everybody agreed on that amendment?
Sure.
Yeah. Now that does leave us with the thorny point of who wants to be on this committee. No, we don't have to do that tonight. We can do that a bit later on. But can I have an expression of anybody that would be vaguely interested in doing this?
Just a point of order, Chair.
I'm being told we might have to distinguish the names tonight, but Councillor Holland.
Yeah, on this one, in relation to the 2 members we sent, does it have to be drawn from this committee constitutionally, Roger?
No, I quote from the Constitution that the Hosc Joint Scrutiny Committee can nominate any member, as long as that member doesn't belong to Cabinet.
The Vice Chair just said we should just nominate anybody from group. I think she's just nominated herself as the most unpopular councillor in the chamber.
Sorry, Chair. What I'm really anxious about is 2 things. That we have got a net that's wide enough, but I'm also really worried about the recommendations as they stand, bearing in mind our position. I know full well that this is going to be imposed upon us, and we've got to be pragmatic and realistic about that. What I am worried about is if we go for these recommendations per se, it does to a large. It does. I wouldn't say it makes this body impotent, but in the biggest transformation of health services in our area for a generation, we're actually delegating a hell of a lot of power out to a committee of 6 elected people who are effectively accountable, and that's a hard ask. Nevertheless, for that, I'm guided by the expertise of the panel and, of course, your good self and the Vice Chair.
I think I would tend to agree almost wholeheartedly with that, Councillor Holloway. Unfortunately, I think this is going to be foisted upon us regardless. I do agree it is, from my point of view, completely unnecessary. I think it does detract from the actions of this committee. However, be that as it may, none of us like it, but we have to commit to doing it. And as I said, that's why we must insist on those times. Otherwise, it's a no-go for us. So we're not saying we're not doing it, but we're saying you have to do it on our terms in this particular instance. I don't think that's an unreasonable thing to say. I think we've done the 1.1 we commented on, and 1.3 is a no-brainer for us. We're not going to delegate the power of referral to the Secretary of State. I mean, crikey, we seem to be losing enough as it is. Let's not lose everything. So all those points taken on board, I've been told we do have to give some kind of an idea as to who will do this. Now, as chair of the committee, and assuming we can get to 7 o'clock agreement, I will be one of the 4. We can delegate 4. Do I have anybody else who's prepared to put themselves forward? Vice Chair, Councillor Victoria Holloway.
Chair, I don't... So forward,
yes,
sorry, but... Do we have to be there? Is there no way conference calls could be used in that respect? You know, because if
that is a fair point. I shall pass that one over.
Yeah, I mean, if it means...
Video link, George.
Pardon?
Yeah, most phones have speakers.
Video link, yeah. I mean, travelling an hour there and an hour back, and then spending 2 hours there, that's
Skype.
4 hours.
Have a Skype meeting.
Yeah, why can't it be? We do conference calls. I've done conference calls. I can't see why we can't do that. You know. Sorry, just a...
I think that's a fair point, Councillor Redson. I think we can ask Jenny to ask that question.
Sorry, just to say as well. Obviously, I am happy to volunteer on the proviso. Obviously, that the meetings are later in the day, and also, you know, if obviously video conferencing is an option, then that's even better. But I think I'm happy to put my name down for now. But I think definitely from our group's point of view, this is something that I would ideally want to discuss with group. Obviously, you know, obviously we do sit on this committee, and we might be best placed. But this is such an important bit of work for Thurrock, and because any member can attend, this would be definitely something I would want to talk to my group about. So just to say that, you know, my name is on there, but I think if it has to be changed and someone else goes, then that will just have to happen. Yeah. I don't know what the rules are around that, but that's what will have to happen if it has to happen.
I think that's fine, and I think what will happen now, if we can't identify the 4, I will have to go out to group leaders anyway and say the HOS couldn't agree on 4. Are you able to nominate 1 member from your group?
That's not fair. I'm the group leader.
Yeah.
It's fine going out to groups, but they're not going to have the knowledge that perhaps we have here to sort of cope with it. To be honest, it's having that knowledge of past, you know, and Mandy knows all the years I've been on it, but it's. You can't give that to someone, and I just wonder what the time scale is. What time we've got to agree this by? Is there no? So
not much, because the next informal meeting is next Monday. The first informal meeting is the 28th of February. The consultation finishes on the 9th of March. So we're assuming they'll do one between. Not 9th of March. We won't. That kicks in on the 23rd, 24th of March.
hang it out.
Jenny, sorry, can you just clarify what you mean by like informal meeting versus formal?
The first informal meeting, Andy's going to do another presentation, and again to talk about the terms of reference. I haven't seen the agenda for the formal. I assume it will be the signing off of the terms of reference.
But if that formal meeting is the one that's scheduled for our full council meeting, then Thurrock won't be there. How can they possibly verify the terms of reference?
Yeah, this is something I'm going to have to put in the letter that we write to the clerk and the chair and vice chair.
And I've said I will attend the informal meeting on Monday. It's during the day as an observer, but I'll make the points that you've raised here tonight.
Thank you, Roger. Councillor Redson.
Yeah, because our last full council really is February, isn't it? We have an extraordinary one put in, haven't we, in case we, or not? Yes? In case
March
we need
has been provisionally booked in, yes.
So February is going to be our last one anyway. I don't think it gives us enough time to...
I think we can all agree it's a bit of a shocker. But it is what it is. So we've got 3 names down at least, which is enough to be going on with. We can nominate 4. So we can maybe find somebody somewhere who fancies it. But don't hold your breath.
Well, I think, sorry, Chair, to just interrupt, political balance-wise, we've got 1 from each group, so the 4th one would fall to the Conservative Party.
Oh, good. There you go, Joy. Take that one back to your group and see if you can find someone. But it can't be a cabinet member, though, obviously.
Just last thing, Jenny, will you send through the dates of the meetings?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
As they are currently, as they might change, but they'll have to, but just so we can get an idea.
Okay, I think with that we've probably exhausted the moans on that one. So can we agree recommendations 1.1, the amended 1.2 and the 1.3 on page 39 of the agenda?
Agreed.
Agreed? Okay, thank you very much. That's that one done, dusted. Thank you guys. If you want to leave the last little bit, please feel free. And thank you for your attendance. Right, we now go to item 8 on the agenda, which is the work. That's all okay, lovely. Excellent, well thank you very much. We'll take that as okay for now, thank you. Right, so that's 10 to 9, and that's that meeting finished. So thank you everybody for your participation, your attendance. I look forward to the next one.